This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
I like to think of climate action as a journey with two main engines: government funding and private sector funding. But now it seems that some of these engines are sputtering. Can philanthropic capital help to move things along and get us to where we need to limit global warming? Hi, I'm Audrey, a co-host at Green Pulse, an environmental podcast series at the Straits Times, and we aim to provide you with a Southeast Asian perspective to global environmental issues.
And I'm David Fogarty, and I'm a Deputy Foreign Editor at the Straits Times.
So today we have a very special guest who can give us a little bit more insight into the philanthropy space in Southeast Asia, the broader Asian region. So Sean, maybe just give us a brief introduction to yourself.
Hello, my name is Sean Xiao. I'm the CEO of Philanthropy Asia Alliance, PA for short. It's an initiative by the Temasek Trust, part of Temasek family, into really thinking about how we can be useful to Asia to deal with the challenges in climate, health, and education. So we're really an alliance of the willing of philanthropists from the West and from Asia come together to really think about how we can deploy capital.
Now, looking around the world, we see quite a range of differences from governments. Some have got very clear and strong climate agendas, and others, quite frankly, are faltering. So how are philanthropies responding?
Traditionally, philanthropists have really been in the health and education space, especially in Asia, really. It's a way for successful businessmen to kind of like be good to the village they've been brought up in, to a school they're grateful for. And so climate philanthropy is a little bit newer for very obvious reasons. To a lot of philanthropists, they want to think about results that they can see, outcomes they can see in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But when you think about climate, we all know it is the long game we're playing here, but every little action counts. So I think philanthropists are kind of beginning to understand that they've got to play their part. Otherwise, that 1.5 degree world will not happen. It is not going to happen.
To prevent climate catastrophe, the world needs to limit warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. But since 2023, the global average temperature has already reached this level. The scientists can't say if it is a temporary spike or if we permanently breach the 1.5 degrees Celsius guardrail.
Good evening, and for the sixth straight day now, search and recovery teams are working through the damage and debris after catastrophic flooding.
Extreme heat continued on June 18, triggering heat stroke alerts in 5 prefectures across Japan.
The raging wildfire from the outskirts has now descended into southern French city of Marseille, France's second largest city, leading its airport to be shut down. All takeoffs and landings remain halted.
But we are really seeing the consequences right now. When we think about the floods in the world, when we think about the rising temperatures, I think it's quite clear we've got to do our part in terms of climate action. And so there is scope for philanthropy to fill that gap, but philanthropic capital is really the smallest pot compared to government and private capital. So we kind of like have to think about philanthropic capital as really risk capital.
Risk capital refers to funds that can be used to take on the early, high-risk stages of a project, which commercial funders would usually not back. By providing this initial capital, philanthropic money can help to unlock bigger impact by making the investment safer for others to come in with their own pots of money. This is why philanthropic funds are often considered catalytic.
Risk capital to de-risk some of the projects, some of the feasibility studies, to make the returns work for private capital providers so that they will then come in with the larger pots of money, the trillions we need to solve for climate, not the millions, not the billions even for philanthropists. The amount of philanthropic capital that's gone into climate, we think is really under 1% worldwide and even less for Asia. So that's really the kind of scale we need to kind of like get to And think about the amplification of philanthropic capital. If philanthropic capital is $1 and it can mobilize 9 other dollars, imagine for that $1, you get a $10 project and the impact that comes with that.
Would you say that this kind of amplification is a new wave in philanthropy? So what people associate philanthropy is with like grants, right? Okay, I'm just going to give you this amount of money to execute this amount of project, or just give you enough to like build a school.
It is, I think for a lot of us, right, writing a check is so much easier, or clicking a button, right, to donate on a website. But when you think about that structure, to blend, for example, private equity or private capital with philanthropic capital, it takes a bit of effort. It also, you need to wrap your head around how to think about outcomes from the dollar that you've invested. We're trying to convince philanthropists to go beyond checkbook philanthropy into something a little bit more catalytic. Catalytic can be in a form of, sure, blended finance. There are financial tools out there, but catalytic effect could also come in the form of actually convening, getting people to think about what they need to do. And that's something that we at PA believe very much in.
So Sean, you kind of mentioned two key changes in the philanthropic space, right? The first is, the changing appetites. Instead of health or education or developmental kind of outcomes, philanthropists now starting to recognize the importance of contributing to climate and nature, ocean outcomes. And the second main change that you talked about was the change beyond just checkbook giving to something more catalytic, or something that can, because of the philanthropic funding, attract more funds. Is this two changes you observe playing out globally or in Asia and globally? And do you think that the Asian philanthropies are also now starting to catch on to that?
It's actually very slow globally, but I think it's a bit more happening out in the West than over here. You've heard of, say, Bill Gates and his breakthrough energy. We're really using private capital to solve for climate problems. There are also some bespoke climate funds coming out of the US, for example. And many actually NGOs and IOs in Europe are also having very dedicated funding for the climate. In Asia, less so. But I'm hopeful. Well, I'm an optimist, by nature. As a philanthropist, you've got to be an optimist. What we are seeing is really the emergence of the second generation philanthropists in Asia. You've all heard about the great generational transfer of wealth. Think about the younger people in the room, 30, 40-year-olds. No insult to old people, I'm old myself. But think about the 30, 40-year-olds out there. They could have gone through a corporate experience. They could have gone through a financial industry kind of experience in New York or London. And when they come back and they start thinking about, what do I need to do to be more purposeful in my life, to create more impact? I hope climate, and I think climate is actually on that agenda. And when they've got the smarts and experience to think about structuring, to think a little bit about outcomes, not immediate gratification, but outcomes, then I think I'm pretty hopeful that there will come a time when, we will pivot onto a different, more innovative form of philanthropy.
Maybe one reason for this change in the younger generation is also that we are really seeing the impacts now. Right, the impacts that we are experiencing now in terms of nature loss, climate change impacts is definitely more pronounced now than it was in the past.
Yeah, and do you see that having an effect on companies, right, and their supply chains? So obviously that then, even for family-run companies, they must think about, well, if climate is having an effect now, what's it going to be like in the future? But I think you're right. I think it's also the second generation and the generation coming up behind. It's a different world from their parents or grandparents, right? Tell us a little bit about the main players in philanthropy in Asia. So if you've mentioned family foundations or family companies, so family offices, for example, large foundations, be it the
Gates
Ford,
Foundation.
Gates, or even companies, right? IKEA, for example, both globally and in Asia.
You've checked the boxes and then some. I'll just add a few more to that. So you've got family offices. And that's really where I talk about the generational transfer. Admittedly, less than 2% of family office assets under management, the dollar amounts they manage, actually goes into philanthropy. So there's enormous potential for growth there. So family offices, we're also seeing a lot of them setting up offices in Singapore and Hong Kong. we're really becoming one of the interesting places to set up family offices. And I hope that with the AUM here, the assets under management in Singapore, and more awareness by the younger generation, there'll then be more funds flowing from family offices into philanthropy. The second group you talked a little bit about would be the international foundations. You've heard that Gates Foundation is going to set up an office in Singapore. That's very encouraging. You've got international foundations which historically have been very focused on Africa, coming now to Asia and Southeast Asia to really look at what's out here. Very heartened by that. So you've got the Rockefellers, you've got Novo Nordisk, you've got Wellcome Trust, and of course Gates. And the next category would really be corporate foundations, the Asian corporate foundations. They could have set up their own foundations, like Temasek Foundation's one, Ayala is another. But they could also be doing philanthropy from inside, from within the corporate. And a lot of corporates actually do that. It's just that they may not call it philanthropy, but they actually are doing a lot of that. And so right now, what I want to do is really to understand a little bit about the corporates in Asia that are doing that and how they think about mixing what they do in business with philanthropy. And I think the most potent mix would really be when their philanthropy actually speaks to their business and vice versa. You know, when, for example, they are into renewables, they'll really want to care about the communities, you know, in the solar farms, wind farms and all. And that's really how people and the business and the capital will be deployed to areas that speak to their business as well. Like, for example, MasterCard, very big philanthropic player, really admire them. Their philanthropic course is about financial literacy. It's embedded. Closer to home, Singtel, the telco. One of the causes it actually champions is connectivity. And that's really something that speaks also to their business. So I think that's the category of corporates we talk about. And there are a lot of very quiet philanthropists who don't want to be named. I know a few.
Individuals.
And they do it very, very quietly. Culturally, some don't want to be named, apparently, people believe. And some cultures, especially, they don't talk about it.
Especially in Asia, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Especially in Asia, where you really, don't want your name on a plug in a hospital wing kind of thing. You want to do it quietly.
So maybe let's talk about PAA now, right? The Philanthropy Asian Alliance was launched in 2023. Maybe just tell us a bit more about how you envision PAA in terms of bringing together these different players.
We're really hoping that will be a very useful, neutral platform, safe harbor for people to really share their thoughts, learn from each other. There's a lot that the Western philanthropists have to kind of share their learnings because they really are more advanced. They're more ahead of the curve. But there's a lot that Asian philanthropists can actually bring to the table by showing them that these are done this way in Philippines, in Thailand, in Vietnam. And I think from that kind of interaction, you probably get better solutions, at least a better understanding that can then lead you to a better solution for the challenges we face out here. I think in terms of philanthropic practices as well, in terms of thinking about accountability, in terms of thinking about metrics, measurement. So through the convenings we do, say, for example, the Philanthropy Asia Summit that we do every spring in Singapore, we will really help people think about what good looks like in our space. Less touchy-feely, but really accountability, right? And I think that's very important in our space.
I know PAA has a couple of specific funding groups for oceans, for land use, and for the energy transition. Maybe just tell us a bit more about that.
Okay. So the PAA is actually a very broad alliance. And the philanthropists that are part of our alliance are interested in many things. So what we try to do is to really dive a bit deeper into conversations and solutioning very specific to a challenge. So you rightly pointed out, about a year ago, we started what we call communities of interest in blue oceans, in sustainable land use, and in education. Recently, in the 2025 Philanthropy Asia Summit, we started two more communities. One's really Health for Human Potential. The other new one is really about just energy transition. But let's talk about the first three you mentioned, Audrey. The oceans. We think not enough attention is paid to Southeast Asian oceans. I know we're one ocean in the world, but the Southeast Asian part of the oceans. And we really need to do that because herein lies the coral triangle, biodiversity. Herein lies a lot of climate vulnerable communities living by the coast. Herein lies a lot of unsustainable aquaculture, fishing, overfishing. We really need to get our act together. And I really want PAA to shine a light on some of the challenges out here and really to kind of shepherd people into deploying capital and solutioning for it. It's a complex problem, as you know, Audrey, because you're an ocean specialist and we met at the UN Oceans Conference. It's a very complex problem from discovery to economic livelihoods to marine protected areas. Where do we stop? Where do we intervene? Where are the weakest areas? Where are the gaps? And that's really an area we want to look at. So that's a Blue Oceans community. And I've got a lot of confidence that we're going to be able to do something very meaningful out here. The second one on sustainable land use is really about how do we think about forestry, about agricultural methods that are practiced in Southeast Asia that are not very sustainable. How do we get a flywheel, a positive flywheel whereby there's economic benefits from conserving the forests instead of burning and slashing them, and then actually investing it back into the communities and the livelihoods. And the third one is really about education. It's really about giving the fishing rod, not the fish, to this child in school, preschool, and through the learning cycle and life stages. We're pretty early in that at the moment. It's really looking at where we can play meaningfully, because in this space, a lot of people are doing scholarships, building a school. But how do you think about scaling philanthropy beyond that single project? And that's what I'm trying to get a bit more feedback from our members on.
Are there specific projects that you think you could cite?
Certainly. One project's called SEAFOAM, SEAFOAM. It's a project that PAA and the partners actually undertook to work with the government of Indonesia to really come up with how they think, enabling the thinking around the value of their blue economy. And then how do you then bake that into an NDC, nationally
determined contributions?
And how do you bake it into nationally determined contributions? And I think that's a good first step for SEAFOAM. And thereafter, it's really then how do we think about capacity building? How do we think about operationalizing that? That's one project that's actually parked within our Blue Oceans community that we launched a year ago. Another is really a project under the community is the International Blue Carbon Institute, which does a lot of interesting research, baselining, because the information and the data is really not easily available in Southeast Asia. So I think a lot of that would be very interesting as a baseline to think about what the interventions could be. Quite a bunch of projects have happened within the community.
What other areas do you think philanthropies with an interest in Asia can look into more?
That's in adaptation. And we wish more can be done.
That's a big one.
Yes, that's a big one. Mitigation, climate mitigation, frankly, private capital is interested in that space. We're talking about renewables. They're investable by now. I think in the adaptation, it's really a bit overlooked. And that's an area that we think we really should be focusing a bit of our attention on. I think some of the interventions right now are very ad hoc, are pretty localized. For example, building up walls to prevent flooding. How do you think about, for example, right, the circularity of it all, having mangroves, coral reefs, that then actually mitigate to some extent heavy rainfalls, flooding in coastal communities, right? And in terms of preserving corals, how then do you think about using that as a tourist attraction and then charging tourists a fee for that? And the money that goes into ecotourism will then be able to feed into the adaptation.
I was going to ask for other innovative financing areas that foundations can really play a role. There could be debt for nature swaps, for example, coral reef bonds, blue bonds.
I love these instruments because it speaks to what I've done in my life in corporate, but not a lot of philanthropists get it. Right now, there's a coral bond, World Bank. I think it's meant to really continue and amplify the action in Raja Ampat in Indonesia. It's an outcome-based bond. I love the construct of it on paper. So the bond holders, the institution bond holders, would actually have a certain coupon rate, and then they forego that until the outcomes are arrived or derived. And when the outcomes actually are achieved, guess who's going to pay them the yields and the coupons? Philanthropists. I love for philanthropists to think that forward. David, that's a fantastic example of how you could actually amplify. The proof is in the eating. Right now, beyond this, whether it's successful or not, we've got to think about how then do you scale these funding models. Otherwise, you'll be taking 18 months, 24 months to get one out.
So, Sean, on the concept of catalytic capital, right? Investing $1 and you get $10 worth that can go into a project. It sounds very good in theory. But what are you hearing from the philanthropists that you work with? What is giving them pause? You mentioned maybe perhaps there's not enough of that financial knowledge to structure these products. But then again, philanthropists won't be the only player in this, right? It would probably be structured by banks or large foundations that have these capacities. So what is giving philanthropists pause in joining such projects?
Okay, so you've listed the knowledge gap and all that. Okay, that's solvable. I think fundamentally, philanthropists, the ones I spoke to, have an issue. Why am I making the fat cats fatter? Why am I making the private equity, private capital providers achieve their returns and I'm the dumb capital in inverted commas? That's something we really need to change. By becoming that first loss, the concessional capital, you're actually enabling a much bigger project to take off the ground that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get into place. And that's really, I think, a very fundamental change, a mindset change we need to effect among the philanthropists.
Yeah. Okay, but how is PAA hoping to solve this?
Yeah, if you don't believe in it, don't be in philanthropy. You've got to believe that what you do will move the needle bit by bit. If you all believe that it's really only about governments making the change, then we should be doing a lot of single-use plastic. But we all can do our part to make a change to the world. And if it doesn't start with me, then nobody else would do it. To try and get that mindset change. And I think I'm kind of in a position where I can, because I've seen corporate at work. My experience is corporate. I've also done philanthropy. And now I'm in the front row seat of actual action. And I really want to use what I've learned all these years to really try and move the needle.
But I think the needle really has moved in the past decade because foundations have become much more open. There's a willingness to look at new types of projects, financing, compared to a decade ago when they were much more conservative.
Yes. Thank you, David.
And the need is continuously growing.
Right. So I think what I was holding ourselves up to is a pretty high bar in terms of really being able to just activate. Yeah, sure, why not? I'll amplify 5 times, 10 times the capital. I think in their own way, philanthropists have been doing that. When you think about being innovative, being catalytic, it can really take the form of a TA, technical assistance scheme. You kind of give a grant as a philanthropist into studying a project. Yes, no, does it make business or projections or not? You've done the part too, right? If eventually the project is investable, then the private equity goes in. But you've actually done the part of actually land surveying, for example, etc., right? Things like that. So that's one. I think some philanthropists have done a good job in terms of offtake or subsidizing, say, a new service or product that goes to the market, right? And therefore make it more receptive, more acceptable to the end consumer or the person who gets the service. And by doing that, you're actually catalyzing the growth of that industry. For example, I've seen some philanthropists who have actually subsidized the cost of vaccine, right, to low-income countries. And so that the vaccine manufacturing facility could then produce scale, and eventually the unit cost would go down. So that's catalytic.
Yeah. So just with PAA, have you found that there's more foundations or wealthy individuals knocking on your door saying, we'd like to team up with you?
Not enough. Not enough.
But is your financial firepower growing every year?
Okay, so the way we want to think about it is really great. One is really people knocking on your door saying, I want to do things in Asia. The second thing is really, what do they want to do in Asia? That's very important. The quality and the catalytic projects that we want to drive. Are they things that other people would not do otherwise? So we're really trying to think a little bit about catalytic projects that are scalable across continents, catalytic projects that have multi-funder interests, backed by science, and obviously some are really around-the-corner projects.
Right now, for a lot of PAA's members, right, your pioneers, the people who are contributing to these specialized interest groups you're talking about, we are seeing some very big names globally, right? Gates Foundation, Dalio Philanthropies, QuantH. What do you see is the role of, these large firms, we wouldn't call them firms, but these large organizations expressing an interest in Asia? Like, what is the role that they can bring towards the philanthropic community here?
Apart from the bigger pots of money they bring to the table and their know-how, the Gates Foundation has done a lot of programs in Africa, right? That'll be relevant to Asia. I think it's symbolic too. It's really that Asians and Westerners are coming together, and Asian philanthropists are actually veering out of their comfort zone. Traditionally, they might have been in education, but they think about climate. So I think it's really the signaling that they do and bring with that then encourages the rest of the philanthropic world to come along.
And I guess if we could end this podcast by going back to the question that we started with about the two key engines of our environmental journey, governments, private sector. I guess some governments are still going ahead. How much can philanthropy make up, for the loss in engine power from other entities?
The gap is huge, but the pullout of development aid, I'm not sure if it will fill 100% of that. But right through this conversation, I was trying to really make people understand and realize that philanthropic capital is risk capital out there, and that the end game is not the Band-Aid we provide. The end game is really the big private capital that can then work as magic.
So it's not the $1 from the philanthropies, it's the $9 that
Thank you.
philanthropic
Yes.
capital brings
Thank
in.
you. That's what I meant, yeah.
So I think that's a good note to end off on. That wraps it up for this episode of Green Pulse. Once again, I'm Audrey Tan.
And I'm David Fogarty. You can email us your thoughts on this episode. Links to our articles and how to connect with us on social media are in our show notes. This episode was edited by Hajur Rahim. Thanks for listening.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening.